Welcome to Business and Human Rights in the Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, a podcast with recent updates and voices from the region on responsible business conduct. This is Business and Human Rights in the Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, a podcast series from the Central and Eastern European and Central Asian Business and Human Rights Association, the regional network connecting business and human rights experts across the region. In each episode, we speak with business leaders, policymakers, and experts who are shaping responsible business conduct across the region. Together, we explore topics ranging from conflict-sensitive due diligence to region's sustainability trends, and much more. In the first 10 episodes, we will focus on business and human rights in the Eastern Partnership to explore responsible business conduct across Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, as well as the work of organizations and institutions in the European Union that engage with the Eastern Partnership. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to podcast on business and human rights in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Today is the first episode, and we are starting our conversations about business and human rights in the region. Today's episode is with Beata Faraci, co-founder and president of the board of the Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business. My name is Elena Ovarova, and I'm the host of this episode. I'm head of the International Lab on Business and Human Rights, Yaroslav Mudryi National Law University, and Business and Human Rights Specialist, UNDP. And Beata, welcome.
Thank you, Elena, and welcome everybody to this episode.
Beata, when Brussels was dismantling the corporate sustainability due diligence directive through the omnibus process, I was listening to those debates and thought 10 years ago, nobody in Kharkiv, where National Law University located, even knew what due diligence was. And now the European Union is arguing about how much to simplify it. It's funny where we ended up almost 10 years since our first email exchange. It was 2017. We were preparing the first Kharkiv Legal Forum, business and human rights conversation, and trying to start what was at that time a very new conversation in Ukraine. I wrote to you in Poland and basically said, Beata, nice to meet you, and please come and help us talk about this. Do you remember that first message? And more importantly, when you received it, did you think something important started in Ukraine, or did you think, who is this very strange woman from Kharkiv?
Well, what I do remember very well, actually, is the feeling of frustration, because when I received your message, I've actually thought, like, wow, I didn't know that somebody talking about business and human rights in Ukraine, and I was very keen to learn, and I wanted to go. But unfortunately, I had some health issues at the time, and I couldn't. And I was like, well, whom I can recommend to you to go to Kharkiv and share the experience, share the lessons, point to things to avoid when working on business and human rights from the scratch. And I do remember that I was recommending experts from Danish Institute for Human Rights because of some of their experience in the region. But I was also more than happy, actually, the following year when I could attend the second Kharkiv Legal Forum and take part in those discussions. As you've said, it was the beginning. The discussion was just starting. So it was just this very typical mix of different level of understanding and expertise in the room. So you had people who knew what they are talking about, really grasped what's behind such terms like due diligence or grievance mechanisms. And there were people who were still struggling to really get the grasp of it. And in a way, it reminded me of Poland when we organized the first conference on business and human rights in 2013. I remember that after the whole day of discussions and presentations by leading experts in Europe. There was one person who came to me and was at the end of this full day of discussions about business and human rights, asking the question, so what is it all about, this business and human rights? And I had this feeling of, on one hand, failure, like, the whole day of discussions, plenaries and examples. And then I realized that it's not only at what we talk about, but also how we talk about it. I think this is one of those moments when you realize that it's just about making the message clear and simple. I'm not saying simplistic, but simple, easy to understand, because we are using terms which have different meanings in other areas of law, or because we are using terms that are not existing in a given language. And then the recollection of the time when we were translating UN guiding principles into Polish came back, because that was also the time when we had endless discussions how to best translate even such simple terms as access to remedy, which out of a sudden, when you try to translate it into Polish, you basically need 2-line sentence to get all the aspects of those 3 words in English. So yes, it was really a mixture of different feelings and recollections and eagerness to be there, while knowing that I'll have to wait for a bit. But I do remember that was a moment when we also started to talk about potential study visit by experts from Ukraine to Poland and so on. So it was also a very nice start to the later collaboration.
It was very important start and crucial moment. And this point about simplification of language, it's still relevant because with this translation of Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, current to Ukrainian, there are so many challenges related to the terminologies. But talking more broadly about the BHR landscape in Central and Eastern Europe back then, what has really changed?
If we want to look into some obvious indicators, for example, existence of national action plans, say at that time, 2017, when you've approached me, Poland was basically just the second country in the region that has adopted the National Action Plan, following Lithuania, who did it in 2015. Also, when it comes to state non-judicial grievance mechanisms, notably OECD national contact points, at that time, except for Poland, which handled a couple of cases, there was almost no activity in the region. We hardly could even get across to some of the NCPs. It changed after 2023, after the revision of the OECD guidelines and stronger support to the NCP network and introduction of the peer review. We can see the changes that this brought about in the region. In several countries, we do have national action plans. Actually, Poland just recently, at the very beginning of August this year, had adopted its 3rd national action plan. Then we've got also national action plans in Slovenia. Also, Kyrgyzstan have adopted one. In the past, also Czechia and Lithuania did have one national action plans. Some of the countries also have included provisions or chapters on BHR in their general national action plans on human rights. For example, Ukraine being the one, I think Georgia. And currently, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kazakhstan are also working towards developing national action plans. So when it comes to this awareness among the governments, there is a major difference. Yes, we can say that it's still just a few countries out of the, at least we see countries from different subregions already taking the stance. And when we look into the Balkans, in May 2026, even Montenegro has agreed on a national roadmap to strengthen the responsible business conduct and promote decent work. Also, Croatia have included some elements which are of relevance to the responsible business conduct in its national action plan on human rights. So they were looking more into the discrimination and gender equality. But we kind of can know different developments in other countries, like in Uzbekistan, where the systemic state-imposed forced labor has basically been eliminated.
Thank you so much for this overview. I also heard that Uzbekistan is going to develop national baseline assessments. Moldova published in November last year the national baseline assessment, and there are plans to go first in what modality the country still needs to decide, but there are steps towards. Also, I can share some news that the Ministry of Economy and Environment of Ukraine is developing National Action Plan on Responsible Business Conduct. And of course, the attention will be paid on business and human rights and situation of the war and post-war reconstruction. There are many developments, but national action plans are just part of the picture. And can we see any improvements in other areas, especially access to remedies?
Definitely. We have mentioned the NCPs looking at developments in this area. Back in 2017, it was just Poland that handled a few cases. And right now, we have cases being handled by Czechia, Hungary, Latvia, Slovenia, and Kazakhstan NCP OECD. And yes, one can say that still many of the NCPs in the region haven't handled any cases, but it's just a matter of time because the OECD guidelines are really getting more and more promoted. Obviously, the inclusion of the OECD guidelines and UN guiding principles in the taxonomy of the EU has brought a major shift in the awareness by the companies. And hopefully with time, trade unions and civil society will start using this avenue to get justice, basically, for the people adversely affected by business activities. So yes, we already can see it. And we also note much bigger activity of various NCPs in the region when it comes to the promotion of OECD standards and making them more relevant to specific sectors and groups. And at least from the perspective of the NGO in Poland, I can say that I'm quite impressed by how Polish NCP is trying to ensure that also civil society and trade unions are really present in the discussions about responsible business conduct. It's not just a discussion between a government and business. It's the voices of the civil society and trade unions are really heard.
Absolutely agree. And by the way, you mentioned in the beginning this study visit you organized for Ukrainian stakeholders. This study visit included the meeting with the Polish NCP. It was very valuable experience. So I can share as well because we cooperate a lot with Ukrainian NCP and the Ministry of Economy hosts the OECD NCP in Ukraine. And that's why the Ministry of Economy leads most of business and human rights developments in Ukraine with the support of Polish NCP, because I hear a lot of positive feedbacks how Polish NCP supports Ukrainian NCP in terms of sharing experience, good practices. I would like to use this opportunity to express my gratitude to Polish NCP for all support that they provide to Ukrainian NCP. Let me go to the next question about what helped to move this topic up on the governments, but also other stakeholders.
When it comes to both governments, but also business, it would be very strange not to mention regulatory developments in Europe, in particular European Union, because when the discussion started on taxonomy, on corporate sustainability due diligence directive, on forced labor regulation, and so on, before them, there was relatively little interest from the business in the discussions. Even in the room full of companies, if we would ask a question in 2017, how many of you are familiar with OECD guidelines, there would be just a couple of people raising hands. This situation is completely changed now. There is definitely the impact of the regulatory developments at the EU level. It's also important to mention actions by a number of other international actors who are actively promoting and bringing attention to the topic in the region. We had, for example, 3 regional fora on business and human rights organized by Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and UNDP. We had a chance to contribute to them in the past. We did have country visits by UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights in the region. So notably, I think, Georgia and recently Serbia. I think it's important to stress the lessons and recommendations made during those country visits are important also for the other countries to follow and take the lessons. It's also important to highlight the support that was provided by UNDP, sometimes with the support of other government actors, and for example, the big grant by Japan to support trainings and awareness raising around responsible business conduct across 17 or more countries globally. Among those countries, there were some of the countries from Central Asia, which probably without this in collaboration between UNDP and Japan have waited a few more years to get such a proper and thorough training. Among the actors who are also active in promoting business and human rights, the National Law University in Kharkiv, Polish Institute, and a number of other actors like Frank Bold Foundation from Czechia, who is very active at the European level and played a very important role in a number of discussions and other developments. It's also very important to stress this role of the civil society, because when we look into those developments in the region, you would see that in Ukraine, discussions started because of your work with the International Lab on Business and Human Rights at the National University and discussions with different actors in the administration about why it's necessary to pick it up. In Poland, it was our activity to bring the attention to the topic and highlight the importance. Obviously, changes wouldn't be possible without people in the administration, inside the administration or inside the business. But I have impressions that the spark that started the discussion before the discussion about the EU regulation came in around 2020 was really lightened by the civil society and academia in a number of countries, in the region at least. Picture is not just this perfect. The discussion is still ongoing. It's still more at the beginnings than towards the end when it comes to the maturity growth. And we do have issues around the exploitation of migrant workers. And I would say this is something which is valid across the whole region. We've got the declining stability and precarization of jobs. And we've got the increase in the platform work and the number of temporary jobs, and so on, so on. The picture is far from perfect. We wrote about it in the articles on Central and Eastern Europe, both for the Business and Human Rights Journal and in some other publications. So we can provide links to that in the commentaries.
Yeah, sure. The role of civil society organization is incredibly important in the region, and their role to promote business and human rights is crucial. But let's imagine we are back in 2017 and have a look at 2026. What would surprise us most about 2026? And can we say that there is a change in attitude of governments and business itself, not just these regulations, but also real attitude, real politic? And did expectations towards companies changed, or did we simply become much better at speaking the BHR language?
But not necessarily walking this language. I think the answer is very mixed. I don't think it's possible to give one single answer, given that we are talking about really large number of countries. It's over 20 countries when we look into the whole Central Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Speaking from the Polish perspective, I've got a very mixed feeling. On one hand, we see some very strong actions by some actors within the public administration who are really pushing for a big change and have played really very strong role when it comes to raising awareness of business and trying to move it to the bright side of the moon. And when we look at such developments like the creation of an auxiliary committee to the Council of Ministers on supporting the sustainable development of enterprises, obviously, this is a very important development because it shows that the government notices that there is a role for it when it comes to really helping to shape the road forward. And when we look into the activity of this committee and some of its working group, it serves as a discussion forum for stakeholders on such issues like corporate sustainability, due diligence, transposition, which is one of the biggest issues right now and one of the most complex ones. At the same time, we have seen the governments in Central Eastern Europe being very active and supportive of the weakening of the CSDDD during the omnibus negotiations. The picture is very mixed. On one hand, judging by some other reforms like strengthening of the labor codes, for example, you get the impression that the government really wants to change things for better, that really wants to increase the protections of people providing work. But at the same time, it's a little bit afraid of losing the competitive edge. And despite all the talks that the region should stop relying on cheap labor to attract investments, I have impressions that the government are still trapped. If we provide too good environment for workers, we'll lose the investment, which it might be an assumption, but I might be also proved wrong. There is definitely a change in attitude of governments. We do have a different level of depth in the discussions with public administrations on those issues. But at the same time, the group of experts within the government is still very small. This goes for the other countries, because whenever we talk to other NGOs from other countries about even just transposition of the CSDDD directive, the due diligence directive, we constantly hear the same, that there are not enough people in administration who actually really know what this due diligence is about. And a number of experts are expressing concerns about quality of the transposition simply because of this lack of expertise across the administration. Mm-hmm. We need to remember that it's not just one department that knows, one ministry that knows, but obviously different comments are provided by different actors, different institutions, different public administration institutions, and these they do shape the laws that will be transposing the due diligence legislation. So this does matter.
And we still need this policy coherence, right?
Yes, exactly.
The same to many countries in the region. And it was one of the reasons why we started this conversation about creating the regional association on business and human rights. And together with Jernej Letner-Černić, business and human rights expert and professor from Slovenia, three of us created the regional BHR association, and I remember discussing at some point which countries should be covered: Warsaw, Ljubljana, Kharkiv, Tbilisi, Bishkek, Tashkent. These are very different political and economic contexts. So my question to you is Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia really a BHR region? What holds this region together?
I don't really know if we can say that it's BHR region. I would be very cautious about that. Going back to the time when we were trying to decide in a broader group of people about whether the initially Central and Eastern European Business and Human Rights Associations should be extended and cover also Central Asia. I do remember our discussions about the shared post-Soviet legacy and a number of elements that make challenges in implementing business and human rights in our countries than compared to between Uzbekistan and Philippines. It's also reflected in how Office of the High Commissioner on Business and Human Rights currently starts to structure regional sessions during UN Forum, because the issues that business and civil society and people in Central and Eastern Asia are facing are more similar in nature to that we are experiencing in Caucasian countries. Mm-hmm. And Central Eastern Europe, the countries like Poland or Slovenia or Czechia. One of the elements that runs across is a post-Soviet legacy. It's still very fragile rule of law. Yes, there are big differences between Poland or Ukraine and Belarus when it comes to even whether there is democracy or not. But still, it's quite difficult to say about that number of countries in the region that the rule of law is very stable. I mean, even Poland still has issues with that. This is one of the elements. So we do have this common historical experience, which left a very strong mark on the relations between state and other actors, so state and business, state and civil society. So this does matter. We have the legacy of a strong role of state. And the more we move towards the east, the bigger role that state-owned enterprises do play, and more enterprises are led by the state. We do have this element of oligarchic structures in a number of countries. I'm not saying that it's valid for the countries in Central Eastern Europe and Central Asia, but we were doing the study for the UNDP, which cut across 18 countries. It was one of the elements that we picked up as something that really makes an impact and affects the possibility to run business in a responsible way across the region. But obviously there are differences. Some of the countries in Central Eastern Europe are members of the EU. On the other hand, countries in Central Asia are probably much less influenced by the EU regulations that some of us would think, simply because their major trading partners are more towards the east. The impact that EU regulations would have on behavior of business or countries, for example, like in Armenia, Azerbaijan, or Georgia, this impact is totally different in Central Asia. So yes, and we do have issues across the region with limited policy coherence, but I wouldn't say that's only this region problem. I have the impression it's a global issue. There is an issue with labor rights protections, and one of the major challenges that is common is also weak access to remedy and very lengthy court proceedings, which make submitting a case to the court meaningless. What we noticed across the countries is that whenever alternative dispute resolution options are coming up, they are at least initially picked up with some really great interest, because they are seen as a really good alternative to the lengthy judicial proceedings. Whether those alternative dispute resolutions really work, it's another matter, but initially mediation and solutions like that are looked at with great interest.
Thank you for this response. And those studies that we did, it was a great experience also to collaborate with you and with Yevne and with the UNDP team. I also wanted to discuss with you one more change that I think happened during these years, that in 2017 we were looking for people who could come, to Ukraine and explain business and human rights. And you also mentioned that when I sent a mail to you, you were thinking about whom to recommend. And a few years later, at the regional forums, consultations, and the UN forums, we were trying to connect people from the region to one another and to provide them with the opportunity to exchange experience and, to provide some knowledge about BHR issues in the region. And in 2020, we were together in the opening plenary of the first regional forum, BHR forum for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. You already mentioned that having this forum is also a great achievement for the region. And it was also a great experience. And then we also worked together to organize this regional consultation on investment agreements and human rights on the request on the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and many other occasions to bring together people from the region to discuss different business and human rights issues. How do we create and did we create business and human rights community in the region? So we created association, but can we say that now we have business and human rights community?
I think the answer is again mixed. Got some pockets of community in different areas, and we've got slowly growing network compared to 2017. If I were to say yes or no, I would say yes. But it's a very careful yes, because it's nothing compared to the demands and to the scale of the region. The same goes for Poland, except for a few people who were familiar with the topic at that time. But if we look now, there is already a group of people who and are driving the discussions in those countries. I think the association did play a role, and quite an important one, also because of the Summer Academy that we've organized a few years back. I think 2021 or 2022 was the first edition. And it was important because it was the first time when around 30 people from 17 or 18 countries actually met and learned about business and human rights. I know that we are calling it Summer Academy. It's not really giving it a justice. It should be called Intensive Course for Professionals on Business and Human Rights. I think it did matter because, first of all, if we look into the connections that were made there and the impact it made, the first cohort, it really is big. There are people who are working currently for UNDP, UN Global Compact in Georgia. Another colleague, Oleva Panova, has started the foundation in Bulgaria, which was playing a very important role when it comes to driving discussions during the time of discussions around CSDDD and Omnibus. And some other colleagues from Kyrgyzstan were taking this knowledge and also advising some local communities. And they've shared this experience also at the UN Forum. Impact is going well beyond just individuals improving their skills or getting additional knowledge. And what was also important with this first edition was that thanks to funding from the EEA grants, we've managed to provide some mentoring by leading experts to the interested participants who were developing case studies about the region. It's also an important element because, as you've mentioned, when we were speaking about human rights and were teaching about business and human rights, we had to rely on cases like Ogoni 9 and Shell and the usual ones. And of course, they are relevant. If you are teaching people in Central Eastern Europe about business and human rights, it would make much more sense to use examples from the origin. So unfortunately, we are not lacking in cases of negative human rights impact. Having those 15 case studies developed by the participants of the Summer Academy is really important. And it's also helping to raise awareness in the region because it's a material that is used by academics and other actors who are training and leading education on those issues. And all the next editions are building on this initial cohort and expanding the network. We have, right now, this year, it's the 4th edition of the Summer Academy, and got more business representatives at very high level when it comes to internal company structures joining the course, which also indicates that there is a thirst for this education and for this knowledge among the professional community. And luckily, we do have also experts from civil society, but also public administration, international organizations like UNDP being part of those groups, which basically enables the exchange not only between experts from one sector, but also helps to build understanding of limitations or difficulties that other actors, members of other stakeholder groups might have when it comes to business and human rights implementation. And I don't want to play the devil's advocate right now, but sometimes civil society members underestimate how difficult it is to change things from inside in the company and how much time it takes. And obviously, this is not excuse because if somebody is adversely affected by the company and his rights are affected and infringed, obviously for this person, what is important is to have the end to this violation and have a remedy. It's important for this dialogue between different actors to continue to help understand where we can speed up things and where other resources are needed to end the adverse impacts more quickly. And like the setting of a joint learning space, like Summer Academy, is one of the safe spaces where people can actually talk about it. Because in most settings, it's more of the adversaries situation where each of the sides tries to defend its position or push for its position. Even though we constantly speak when we talk about business and human rights and UN guiding principles, that it's about the collaborations, that neither state nor business can change things by itself, nor civil society. We really need the collaboration across all stakeholder groups to really make a lasting change. And for example, forced labor is one of the areas where this is strongly visible.
I agree, and this is a great final point for our first conversation on business and human rights in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I totally agree about the Summer Academy and BHR community, which is very much connected to the Summer Academy. I'm very pleased that we keep connection with all participants of all editions of Summer Academy. Many of them are in BHR field and they found a place in BHR field. And also, as you said, it's very important for people, especially at that stage where we are in the region, to have an opportunity to be part of the community and to feel that they can communicate some issues, they can receive advice, they can exchange some knowledge and so on. So definitely very important achievement for us. We can also use this opportunity to express our gratitude to all experts, those experts who are trainers and lecturers for the academy, because Beata managed to bring together so many prominent BHR names, and it's really a great cohort of experts on BHR. So
maybe I can just add one thing. What is important is to highlight that right now, if we want to learn about what are the developments in one of the countries in the region, there is at least one or two people that we can turn to request such information. So that's one. But it's about the sharing the experience between experts in the network. I do remember when we were starting our activity so many years ago, it was just basically learning a number of things as we went. And the advice and support of other colleagues, more senior and with more experience from other countries, back then from the Danish Institute for Human Rights or some other organizations like SHIFT, it was extremely important for us and our building of our expertise. Because there were a number of things that many years ago we did for the first time, like verification of workers' conditions in the factories or some providing the advice to companies. This is something where you always, when you do for the first time, you are a bit uncertain. So having this network of people in the region to lean on and ask, okay, how did you handle it? This is important also to avoid mistakes. And this is also what strengthens the region. And I know that with limited resources, it's always difficult to ensure, the coordination of the association at the levels that we would want to. But hopefully, with this series and a number of other activities, we'll be able to give it a stronger push.
And about next months and years that we definitely will continue this conversation. And I'm very much looking forward to meet with Beata again in one of our next episodes. And thank you very much, Beata. It was so great pleasure to talk to you and, to have a little bit of nostalgia, but also to reflect, what we achieved and what we didn't achieve during these 10 years. And to have this chance just to spend with you this time.
Thank you very much, Elena, as well. What's left is to invite our listeners to the next episodes in this podcast series, in which we'll look in more detail into developments in individual countries across the region.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Business and Human Rights in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, a podcast by Central and Eastern European and Central Asia Business and Human Rights Association, the regional business and human rights network. This episode is part of the Sustainable Business for Responsible Economic Development in the Eastern Partnership project, founded by the Swedish Institute. The project is delivered by Yaroslav Mudryi National Law University in Ukraine, UN Global Compact Network, Georgia, the Moldovan Institute for Business and Human Rights, Östgruppen and Swedwatch in Sweden, and Friedrich-Alexander University, Erlangen-Nürnberg in Germany. Special thanks to the Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business for producing this podcast. You can find all our episodes on Spotify as well as at bhrpodcast.org, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more insights from our region. Until next time.